What if the stories we've been told about ancient civilizations are more fiction than fact? For centuries, myths about the past have shaped our understanding of history, like layers of dust covering the true story beneath. But what happens when we wipe away those layers? What truths might we uncover? Today, we're diving into 24 of the most persistent myths about age-old civilizations, myths that have been passed down as truth but crumble under closer scrutiny. From the mysteries of ancient Egypt to the engineering marvels of the Maya, these myths have influenced how we see the past. But here's the thing, they're not just harmless stories. They shape our understanding of history, science, and even human potential. So what if the pyramids weren't built by slaves? What if the Maya didn't predict the end of the world? What if the so-called Dark Ages weren't so dark after all? By debunking these myths, we'll uncover a richer, more accurate picture of the past, one that challenges what we thought we knew and reveals the incredible ingenuity of ancient peoples. Ready to rethink history? Let's get started. Standing tall against the desert sky, the Great Pyramid of Giza is a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. Its massive stones, perfectly aligned with celestial patterns, have sparked awe and curiosity for thousands of years. But behind this marvel lies a story often misunderstood, one that's been shaped more by Hollywood than by history. For decades, the popular narrative has been that the pyramids were built by slaves, toiling under the lash of a tyrannical pharaoh. This image, immortalized in films and textbooks, paints a grim picture of ancient Egypt. But what if that picture is wrong? Archaeological discoveries over the past few decades have turned this myth on its head. Excavations near the pyramids have revealed something extraordinary. Not the remnants of a brutal slave economy, but the remains of a well-organized, skilled workforce. Workers' tombs found close to the pyramids tell a story of respect and honor. These weren't disposable laborers, they were craftsmen, engineers, and artisans who took pride in their work. Inscriptions and artifacts from the site show that they were well-fed, with diets rich in meat, fish, and beer, luxuries far beyond what slaves would have been given. Egyptologists have pieced together a different narrative. Ancient Egypt operated on a system of corvée labor, where citizens contributed their skills to state projects as a form of tax or service. These workers were rotated in and out of the construction sites, ensuring they weren't overburdened. They lived in purpose-built villages with access to medical care and were compensated for their efforts. This system wasn't driven by oppression, but by a shared cultural and religious vision. Building the pyramids was seen as a sacred duty, a way to honor the pharaoh and the gods. So, where did the myth of slave labor come from? Much of it can be traced back to biased historical accounts, like those of the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, who wrote about Egypt centuries after the pyramids were built. His writings, while influential, were often speculative and based on second-hand information. Later, Hollywood perpetuated the myth, dramatizing the story for cinematic effect. Films like The Ten Commandments and Exodus, Gods and Kings reinforced the idea of enslaved masses building monumental structures despite the lack of historical evidence. This raises an important question. Why does the myth persist? Perhaps it's because it fits a familiar narrative of power and exploitation. Or maybe it's easier to believe that such grandeur could only come from forced labor rather than the collective effort of a society united by purpose. But by clinging to this myth, we overlook the true achievements of ancient Egypt, a civilization capable of incredible organization, innovation, and cooperation. As we move forward, let's consider another aspect of ancient Egypt that's often misunderstood: the role of its pharaohs. Were they truly god-kings, as history often portrays them, or is there more to their story? The answers might surprise you. the idea of a lost city hidden beneath the waves has captured imaginations for thousands of years. Atlantis, the legendary island civilization said to have vanished in a single day and night, has become the ultimate symbol of mystery and wonder. From books to movies, the myth of Atlantis has been retold countless times, each version adding its own layer of intrigue. But where did this story come from, and is there any truth to it? The tale of Atlantis first appears in the writings of the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, around 360 BC. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, Plato describes Atlantis as a powerful and advanced civilization that fell out of favor with the gods and was swallowed by the sea. It's a dramatic story, but here's the twist. Plato never presents Atlantis as a historical fact. Instead, scholars argue that he used it as a philosophical allegory, a cautionary tale about hubris and the consequences of moral decay. It was meant to provoke thought, not to document a real place. Despite this, the myth took on a life of its own. Over the centuries, Atlantis shifted from a philosophical metaphor to a pseudo-historical reality. Explorers, writers, and even scientists began speculating about its possible location, from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean. But here's the problem: there's no archaeological evidence to support the existence of Atlantis. Not a single artifact, inscription, or ruin has been found that definitively ties to this legendary civilization. Geologists also point out another flaw in the myth. The idea of an entire continent sinking overnight is scientifically implausible. Earth's tectonic plates move at a glacial pace, and while catastrophic events like volcanic eruptions or tsunamis can reshape coastlines, they don't make continents disappear. The sheer scale of Atlantis' destruction, as described by Plato, defies what we know about the natural world. Modern searches for Atlantis have only added to the mystery and the skepticism. Expeditions to places like the Azores, the Bahamas, and even Antarctica have turned up nothing conclusive. Sonar scans of the ocean floor haven't revealed any traces of a sunken city. Yet the myth persists. Why? Perhaps because Atlantis taps into something universal. Our fascination with the unknown, our longing for a lost golden age, or our curiosity about what might lie beneath the waves. This raises a deeper question. Why do stories like Atlantis endure even when evidence points against them? Maybe it's because they offer a sense of wonder and possibility. They remind us that history is full of gaps and that the past can still surprise us. But they also remind us to approach such tales with a critical eye, separating myth from reality. And speaking of myths that blur the line between fact and fiction, let's turn to another ancient mystery, the so-called Dark Ages. Was this period truly a time of decline and ignorance, or is there more to the story? As we'll see, the truth might just shine a light on how history is written and rewritten. The year 2012 was supposed to be the end of the world, or so we were told. Headlines screamed about the Mayan apocalypse. Movies like 2012 depicted global catastrophe, and doomsday preppers stockpiled supplies. It was a cultural moment that captured the world's imagination, fueled by the belief that the ancient Maya had predicted the end of civilization. But here's the twist: the Maya never actually said the world would end. In fact, their calendar wasn't a countdown to doom, but a sophisticated system for marking time, one that reflected their deep understanding of astronomy and their cyclical view of existence. At the heart of this myth is the Mayan long count calendar, a complex system used to track vast stretches of time. Unlike our linear Gregorian calendar, the long count was based on cycles, with each cycle ending and resetting, much like the turning of a new year. The date that stirred so much fear, December 21st, 2012, was simply the end of one of these cycles, known as the 13th Bayaktan. For the Maya, this wasn't a harbinger of destruction, but a moment of renewal, a time to reflect and prepare for the next era. Mayan scholars have repeatedly emphasized that there's no evidence in their inscriptions, codices, or oral traditions suggesting an apocalypse. Instead, the long count calendar was intertwined with their spiritual and cosmological beliefs. It reflected their understanding of time as something cyclical and eternal, not finite and catastrophic. The Maya were master astronomers, tracking the movements of celestial bodies with remarkable precision. Their calendars were tools for harmony, not harbingers of doom. So, how did this myth take hold? Much of it can be traced back to a mix of misinterpretation and sensationalism. In the 1960s and 70s, New Age writers and fringe theorists began linking the end of the 13th Bayaktan to apocalyptic prophecies, often cherry-picking Mayan symbols and texts to fit their narrative. By the time 2012 approached, the media had amplified these claims, turning a cultural misunderstanding into a global phenomenon. Movies, books, and conspiracy theories all played a role in distorting the true meaning of the Mayan calendar. This raises an important question. Why do we so often project our fears and anxieties onto ancient cultures? Perhaps it's because we're drawn to the idea of lost wisdom, of civilizations that hold secrets we've forgotten. Or maybe it's easier to imagine the end of the world than to confront the uncertainties of our own time. Either way, the 2012 phenomenon reveals more about us than it does about the Maya. The myth also overlooks the incredible achievements of Mayan civilization. Their calendars were feats of mathematics and astronomy, reflecting a worldview that celebrated balance and renewal. By reducing their legacy to a doomsday prediction, we miss the richness of their culture, their art, architecture, and scientific knowledge. As we move forward, let's consider another misunderstood prophecy, the so-called Curse of the Pharaohs. Was it really a supernatural force, or is there a more rational explanation behind the legends of ancient Egypt? The answer might surprise you and challenge how we interpret the past. Rising from the rolling green hills of southern England, Stonehenge stands as one of the most iconic and enigmatic monuments of the ancient world. Its massive stones, arranged in a circular pattern, have inspired countless theories and legends over the centuries. Among the most persistent is the belief that Stonehenge was built by the Druids, the mystical priests of the Celtic world. This image, popularized in paintings, literature, and even modern solstice celebrations, paints a picture of robed figures chanting beneath the stones, conducting rituals under the light of the moon. But here's the catch: Stonehenge was already thousands of years old by the time the Druids arrived on the scene. Archaeological evidence tells a different story. Radiocarbon dating places the construction of Stonehenge between 3000 and 2000 BC, long before the Druids emerged as a cultural force around 500 BC. So, who were the true builders of this monumental site? They were the Neolithic and Bronze Age peoples of prehistoric Britain, a society far removed from the Druidic traditions that came much later. These early Britons were skilled engineers and astronomers, capable of transporting and arranging massive stones with remarkable precision. The construction of Stonehenge was a feat of ingenuity and cooperation. The largest stones, known as sarsens, weigh up to 50 tons each and were transported from quarries over 20 miles away. The smaller bluestones, some of which came from as far as Wales, were likely moved using a combination of sledges, rollers, and waterways. The effort required to build Stonehenge speaks to a highly organized society with a shared vision, one that valued both the practical and the spiritual. But what about the astronomical alignments? Stonehenge is famously aligned with the summer and winter solstices, suggesting it served as a kind of celestial observatory. On the longest day of the year, the sun rises directly over the heel stone, casting its light into the heart of the monument. This alignment wasn't just a coincidence, it was a deliberate design, reflecting the builder's deep connection to the cycles of nature. For them, Stonehenge was likely a place of ritual, celebration, and community, a space where the earthly and the divine intersected. So, how did the Druids become associated with Stonehenge? The answer lies in the 18th century, during a period of Romanticism and renewed interest in Britain's ancient past. Antiquarians like William Stukeley, fascinated by the ruins, began to link them to the Druids, weaving a narrative that blended fact with fantasy. This romanticized version of history, fueled by a longing for a mystical, pre-industrial past, took hold in the cultural imagination. Over time, the myth became so entrenched that even today, modern Druid groups gather at Stonehenge to celebrate the solstices, perpetuating the connection. This raises an intriguing question. Why do we so often romanticize ancient cultures, dressing them in the garb of our own fantasies rather than understanding them on their own terms? Perhaps it's because the past feels distant and unknowable, leaving room for our imaginations to fill in the gaps. But by doing so, we risk overshadowing the real achievements of these ancient peoples, their ingenuity, their resilience, and their profound connection to the world around them. As we shift our focus, let's explore another ancient site wrapped in mystery and myth, the Nazca Lines of Peru. These enormous geoglyphs etched into the desert floor have sparked endless speculation. Were they messages to the gods, alien landing sites, or something else entirely? The truth might be just as fascinating as the legends. Stretching over 13,000 miles across mountains, deserts, and plains, the Great Wall of China is undeniably one of humanity's most awe-inspiring feats of engineering. For centuries, it's been said that this monumental structure is so vast, so grand, that it can be seen from space, a claim that has become a source of immense pride and fascination. But here's the surprising truth: the Great Wall is not visible from space with the naked eye, despite what countless textbooks, documentaries, and even teachers have claimed. This enduring myth doesn't hold up to scientific scrutiny. Astronauts who have journeyed beyond Earth's atmosphere have consistently debunked this idea. From their vantage point in low Earth orbit, the Great Wall blends into the surrounding landscape, its color and texture nearly indistinguishable from the natural terrain. Satellite imagery confirms this, showing that while the wall is detectable with specialized equipment, it's far from standing out as a lone, unmistakable landmark. The reality is that human vision, even in the clarity of space, has its limits. From such a distance, the wall's narrow width and earthy tones make it almost impossible to spot without magnification. So, how did this myth take hold? Part of the answer lies in the wall's symbolic power. For centuries, it has been celebrated as a testament to Chinese ingenuity, resilience, and unity. The idea that it could be seen from space became a metaphor for its grandeur, a way to elevate its status on a global scale. This exaggeration found its way into Western narratives as well, often repeated in books and films as a way to emphasize the wall's unparalleled scale. Over time, the claim became so ingrained in popular culture that it was accepted as fact, even in educational settings. But the myth also raises a deeper question. Why do we feel the need to amplify human achievements to such extraordinary levels? Perhaps it's because we're drawn to stories that elevate our sense of what's possible, that make us feel small in the face of something monumental. Yet, the truth about the Great Wall is no less remarkable. Built over centuries by millions of workers, it stands as a testament to human determination, resourcefulness, and the ability to adapt to challenging environments. Its true story is one of collaboration, innovation, and cultural significance, qualities that don't need embellishment to inspire awe. Interestingly, other man-made structures are far more visible from space. Urban areas, highways, and even large dams stand out clearly against the natural backdrop. The contrast between light and dark, the geometric patterns of cities, and the reflective surfaces of water reservoirs make these features far easier to spot than the Great Wall. This fact not only debunks the myth but also highlights how our perceptions of visibility are shaped by scale, contrast, and context. This brings us to another overhyped ancient wonder, one that has also been shrouded in exaggeration and misunderstanding: the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Were they truly a marvel of engineering, or is their legendary status more myth than reality? As we'll see, the truth might challenge everything we thought we knew about this ancient marvel. For centuries, the story of the Trojan War has captivated audiences with its tales of heroism, betrayal, and divine intervention. Homer's Iliad immortalized the conflict, painting a vivid picture of gods and mortals clashing over the fate of Troy. But is this epic saga purely the stuff of legend, or does it hold a kernel of historical truth? The debate over the Trojan War's reality has been a source of fascination for scholars and enthusiasts alike, blending mythology with archaeology in a way that challenges our understanding of the past. The key to unraveling this myth lies at Hisarlik, a site in modern-day Turkey believed to be the location of ancient Troy. Excavations here, most famously by Heinrich Schliemann in the late 19th century, have revealed a city with multiple layers of occupation spanning thousands of years. Among the ruins, archaeologists uncovered evidence of a massive destruction event: charred walls, broken pottery, and signs of violent upheaval. These findings suggest that Troy was indeed the site of a significant conflict, one that aligns with the timeline of the Trojan War described in ancient texts. But how much of Homer's tale is fact and how much is fiction? Historians point out that ancient storytelling often blended reality with myth, using dramatic embellishments to convey deeper truths. The Iliad and Odyssey were likely based on oral traditions passed down through generations before being written down. Over time, these stories evolved, with gods, heroes, and supernatural elements added to elevate the narrative. The Trojan War, in this context, may have been a real event that was transformed into a legendary epic, reflecting the values, fears, and aspirations of the people who told it. The archaeological layers at Hisarlik further complicate the picture. Troy wasn't just one city, but a series of settlements built atop one another, each representing a different era of history. The layer associated with the Trojan War, Troy Via, shows signs of fortifications, siege, and destruction, but it also reveals a city that was part of a thriving trade network. This suggests that the war, if it happened, was more than just a romantic clash over Helen of Troy. It may have been a strategic conflict over control of key trade routes, with the story of Helen serving as a poetic explanation for a more complex geopolitical struggle. The influence of the Trojan War myth extends far beyond archaeology. It has shaped Western literature, art, and even our understanding of heroism and fate. From Virgil's Aeneid to modern adaptations in film and theater, the story of Troy continues to inspire, but it also raises a broader question: how do myths shape our understanding of history? By blending fact and fiction, myths like the Trojan War offer a window into the values and beliefs of ancient societies, even as they challenge us to separate truth from legend. As we peel back the layers of this enduring myth, it's worth considering another legendary event that blurs the line between history and storytelling: the fall of the Roman Empire. Was it truly a dramatic collapse, or is there more to the story? The answers might reshape how we see one of history's most pivotal moments. When Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés arrived on the shores of Mexico in 1519, he was met with a reception that would later become the stuff of legend. According to the story, the Aztecs, upon seeing Cortés and his men, believed he was the god Quetzalcoatl returning to fulfill an ancient prophecy. This tale, filled with drama and divine irony, has been repeated for centuries as a key moment in the fall of the Aztec Empire. But what if this story, one of the most enduring myths of the colonial era, was never true? Historians have long questioned the narrative that the Aztecs mistook Cortés for a god. The idea first appears in Spanish accounts written decades after the conquest, particularly in the works of Franciscan friars who sought to frame the events as part of a divine plan. These accounts, which often portrayed the Aztecs as superstitious and easily manipulated, served a clear purpose: to justify the Spanish conquest as a preordained victory ordained by God. But Aztec records and archaeological evidence tell a different story. The Aztec worldview was far more complex than the myth suggests. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god associated with wind, wisdom, and creation, was indeed a central figure in Mesoamerican religion. However, the idea that he was expected to return in human form, particularly as a pale, bearded stranger, doesn't align with Aztec religious texts or oral traditions. Instead, the Aztecs were deeply pragmatic and politically astute. When Cortés arrived, they saw him not as a deity but as a powerful foreigner, a potential ally or threat to be carefully navigated. The myth gained traction because it served both Spanish and later European interests. By portraying the Aztecs as naive and easily deceived, the Spanish could frame their conquest as inevitable and morally justified. This narrative also reinforced European stereotypes of indigenous peoples as primitive and incapable of resisting colonization. Over time, the story became embedded in textbooks, films, and popular culture, shaping how generations understood the conquest of Mexico. But why did this myth persist so long? Part of the answer lies in the power of storytelling. Myths like these simplify complex historical events, offering a clear villain and victim, a hero and a prophecy. They also reflect the biases of those who write history. The Aztecs, after all, didn't leave behind written accounts in the same way the Spanish did. Their story was largely told by the victors, who had every reason to cast themselves in a favorable light. This raises an important question. Why do we so often accept colonial narratives without question? Perhaps it's because they offer a tidy explanation for events that are messy, violent, and morally complicated. But by doing so, we risk overlooking the agency and sophistication of the Aztecs, a civilization with a rich culture, advanced infrastructure, and a complex political system. The truth is that the Aztec Empire fell not because of divine fate or superstition, but because of a combination of military strategy, alliances with rival indigenous groups, and the devastating impact of diseases brought by the Spanish. As we reconsider this myth, let's turn to another colonial-era misconception: the idea that indigenous peoples of the Americas were passive victims of European expansion. What if the reality was far more nuanced and far more revealing about the true nature of conquest? The answers might challenge how we view the legacy of colonialism itself. The Library of Alexandria is often remembered as a symbol of tragic loss, a beacon of ancient knowledge consumed by flames. The image of its destruction, a single catastrophic fire wiping out centuries of wisdom, has become a powerful metaphor for the fragility of human achievement. But what if this dramatic narrative isn't the whole story? What if the truth about the library's demise is far more complex and far more revealing about how history is shaped? Historical evidence suggests that the Library of Alexandria didn't fall in one fiery event but experienced a gradual decline over centuries. Founded in the 3rd century BC, it was part of a larger scholarly complex known as the Mayan, a hub of learning that attracted thinkers from across the ancient world. At its height, the library housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls containing works on philosophy, science, literature, and more. Yet, by the time of its eventual disappearance, it had already been weakened by a series of political, cultural, and economic shifts. One of the key moments often cited in the myth is Julius Caesar's siege of Alexandria in 48 BC. According to some accounts, Caesar's forces set fire to ships in the harbor, and the flames spread to parts of the city, including the library. While it's true that some scrolls were lost in this event, historians argue that the library itself was not completely destroyed. Instead, it continued to function, though diminished for centuries afterward. Other factors like cuts to funding, shifting political priorities, and the rise of competing centers of learning all played a role in its decline. Another turning point came in the 3rd century CE, when the Roman Emperor Aurelian's troops sacked Alexandria during a civil war. This event likely caused significant damage to the library, but again, it didn't mark its total destruction. By the 4th century, the library had become a shadow of its former self, its once vast collections scattered or lost. The final blow may have come in the 7th century during the Muslim conquest of Egypt, though even this is debated among scholars. What's clear is that the library's end was not a single dramatic moment but a series of smaller, more mundane events. So why does the myth of a single, catastrophic fire persist? Part of the answer lies in its emotional resonance. A sudden, dramatic loss feels more compelling than a slow decline. Stories of fire and destruction capture our imagination, offering a clear villain and a tragic victim. They also reflect a deeper anxiety about the fragility of knowledge, a fear that the accumulated wisdom of the ages could vanish in an instant. This narrative has been reinforced by writers, filmmakers, and even educators, who often use the image of the burning library as a cautionary tale. But the myth also raises a broader question. Why do we prefer dramatic stories over nuanced truth? Perhaps it's because they're easier to remember and share. They provide a clear narrative arc with a beginning, middle, and end. Yet, by clinging to these simplified versions of history, we risk overlooking the complexities that make the past so fascinating. The story of the Library of Alexandria isn't just about loss. It's about resilience, adaptation, and the ways societies preserve or fail to preserve their knowledge. As we reflect on this myth, it's worth considering another misunderstood chapter of history, the fall of the Roman Empire. Was it truly a sudden collapse, or does its story hold lessons about how civilizations rise, change, and endure? The answers might reshape how we see the echoes of the past in our own world. Picture this: a fearsome Viking warrior standing atop a longship, his horned helmet gleaming in the cold northern light. It's an image that's become synonymous with the Vikings, one that's been immortalized in movies, cartoons, and even sports team logos. But here's the twist: Vikings never actually wore horned helmets. Not in battle, not in ceremonies, not ever. This iconic symbol of Viking identity is in fact a myth, one that says more about how we imagine the past than about the Vikings themselves. So, where did this myth come from? The answer lies not in the Viking Age but in the 19th century, a time when Europe was experiencing a surge of interest in medieval history and folklore. Artists and writers, inspired by romanticized visions of the past, began depicting Vikings with horned helmets in their paintings and operas. One of the most influential figures in this trend was costume designer Carl Emil Doppler, who created horned helmets for an 1876 production of Richard Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen. The striking visuals caught the public's imagination, and soon horned helmets became inseparable from the image of Vikings. Archaeological evidence tells a different story. The few Viking helmets that have been discovered, like the one found in Germany, Norway, show no trace of horns. Instead, they were practical, dome-shaped pieces of armor designed for protection, often made of iron and leather. These helmets were crafted for functionality, not flair, with features like nose guards to shield the face from blows. The idea of adding horns or wings to a helmet would have been not only impractical but downright dangerous in battle, as they could easily catch on weapons or surroundings. This raises an intriguing question. Why did the horned helmet become such a powerful symbol of Viking identity? Part of the answer lies in the allure of exoticism. The Vikings, with their reputation as fierce raiders and explorers, captured the imagination of later generations. The horned helmet became a convenient shorthand for their supposed savagery and otherness, a way to make them stand out in the crowded tapestry of history. Over time, this image was reinforced through popular culture, from comic books to Hollywood films, cementing the myth in the public consciousness. But the myth also overshadows the true achievements of Viking culture. These were not just raiders, they were skilled navigators, traders, and craftsmen who left a lasting impact on the world. Their longships, with their sleek design and shallow draft, allowed them to travel vast distances from the shores of North America to the rivers of Russia. Their legal systems, sagas, and art reveal a complex society with a rich cultural heritage. By clinging to the image of the horned helmet, we risk reducing the Vikings to a caricature, ignoring the depth and diversity of their legacy. As we reconsider this myth, it's worth asking, why do we so often romanticize historical figures instead of understanding their reality? Perhaps it's because myths offer a simpler, more dramatic version of the past, one that's easier to digest and share. But by doing so, we miss the opportunity to engage with history in all its complexity, to see the Vikings not as one-dimensional warriors but as a multifaceted civilization. This brings us to another aspect of Viking culture that's often misunderstood: their role as settlers and explorers. Far from being just raiders, the Vikings established thriving communities across Europe and beyond, leaving a legacy that still shapes the world today. What if their story is less about destruction and more about connection? The answers might surprise you and challenge how we see one of history's most dynamic peoples. When we think of democracy, the image that often comes to mind is ancient Athens, a city-state where citizens gathered in the agora to debate and vote on matters of state. It's a powerful symbol, one that has shaped how we understand the origins of self-governance. But what if the story of democracy doesn't begin in Greece? What if the Athenians weren't the first to experiment with collective decision-making? The truth is, democratic practices existed long before Athens, in places and cultures often overlooked by the traditional narrative. Take Mesopotamia, for example. Around 2000 BCE, the city-states of Sumer operated under a system where councils of elders and assemblies of citizens played key roles in governance. These early forms of collective decision-making were far from perfect power, were still concentrated among elites, but they laid the groundwork for ideas of shared authority. Similarly, in ancient India, the republics of the Vedic period, known as Gana Sanghas, practiced a form of participatory governance. Leaders were elected by assemblies, and decisions were made through debate and consensus. These systems weren't identical to Athenian democracy, but they shared a core principle: the inclusion of diverse voices in the political process. So why do we credit Athens with inventing democracy? Part of the answer lies in the way history is written. The ancient Greeks, particularly figures like Herodotus and Thucydides, documented their political systems in detail, creating a lasting record of their achievements. In contrast, the democratic practices of Mesopotamia and India were either less thoroughly recorded or their records didn't survive in the same way. Over time, the Athenian model became the gold standard, overshadowing earlier experiments in self-governance. But even in Athens, democracy had its limits. Only a fraction of the population, adult male citizens, could participate. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded, making Athenian democracy more of an exclusive club than a universal ideal. This raises an important question. If democracy is about equality and representation, can we truly call Athens its birthplace? Or does the credit belong to the cultures that first embraced the idea of collective decision-making, even if their systems were imperfect? The myth of Athenian originality has had a lasting impact on modern political thought. It's shaped how we view the history of governance, often sidelining the contributions of other civilizations. But by broadening our perspective, we can see democracy not as a single invention but as a series of innovations, each building on what came before. This shift in understanding challenges us to think more critically about the origins of our political systems and the stories we tell about them. As we reflect on this myth, it's worth considering another ancient innovation that's often misunderstood, the concept of zero. Was it truly a breakthrough of Indian mathematicians, or does its story stretch even further back? The answers might change how we see the roots of modern science and mathematics. The hanging gardens of Babylon, lush terraces overflowing with vibrant plants, towering over the desert landscape and watered by an ingenious irrigation system. This breathtaking vision has captivated imaginations for centuries, earning its place among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Described as a testament to human ingenuity and a gift from King Nebuchadnezzar II to his homesick queen, the gardens have become a symbol of ancient engineering at its finest. But here's the catch: despite their legendary status, there's no solid archaeological evidence that the Hanging Gardens ever existed in Babylon, or anywhere else for that matter. Historians and archaeologists have long searched for traces of the gardens, but the results have been inconclusive. Babylon's ruins, meticulously studied for decades, show no signs of the elaborate terraces or advanced irrigation systems described in ancient texts. This absence has led some scholars to propose an intriguing alternative. Perhaps the gardens were located not in Babylon but in Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire. Assyrian records mention extensive gardens built by King Sennacherib, complete with aqueducts and water-lifting mechanisms. These gardens, some argue, may have been the inspiration for the Babylonian legend, their location and origin shifting over time as stories were retold and reinterpreted. Others go even further, suggesting that the Hanging Gardens might be entirely mythical, a story crafted to symbolize the grandeur of ancient Mesopotamia. The earliest accounts of the gardens come from Greek and Roman writers like Strabo and Diodorus Siculus, who lived centuries after Babylon's heyday. These writers, relying on second-hand sources and poetic embellishments, may have blended fact with fiction, creating a narrative that captured the imagination of their audiences. So, how did the myth of the Hanging Gardens take root? Part of the answer lies in their symbolic power. The idea of a lush, green oasis rising above a desert landscape speaks to humanity's desire to conquer nature, to create beauty in the most unlikely places. The gardens became a metaphor for the heights of human achievement, a story that transcended time and culture. Over the centuries, this narrative was reinforced by artists, writers, and architects who used the image of the Hanging Gardens to inspire their own creations. From Renaissance gardens to modern vertical farms, the myth has left an indelible mark on how we think about design and innovation. But this raises a deeper question: why do we cling to stories of ancient wonders even when evidence is scarce? Perhaps it's because these myths offer a sense of wonder and possibility, a reminder that the past is full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered. They challenge us to imagine what might have been, even as we strive to understand what actually was. As we reflect on the enduring allure of the Hanging Gardens, it's worth considering another legendary structure whose origins are shrouded in myth, the Colossus of Rhodes. Was this towering statue of the sun god Helios truly a marvel of ancient engineering, or is its story more fiction than fact? The answers might reshape how we see the legacy of ancient wonders and the stories we tell about them. For centuries, the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs were an impenetrable mystery, a script etched into temple walls and tombs, yet utterly indecipherable to modern eyes. That all changed, we're often told, with the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. This unassuming slab of black granite, inscribed with the same text in three scripts, Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs, has been hailed as the key that unlocked the secrets of ancient Egypt. But here's the twist: while the Rosetta Stone was undoubtedly a breakthrough, it wasn't the only key to understanding hieroglyphs. The story of its role in decipherment is far more complex and far more fascinating than the myth suggests. The Rosetta Stone was discovered in 1799 by French soldiers during Napoleon's campaign in Egypt. It quickly became a symbol of hope for scholars desperate to crack the code of hieroglyphs. The Greek text on the stone, which provided a translation of the other two scripts, offered a tantalizing starting point. But deciphering hieroglyphs wasn't as simple as matching words from one language to another. The process required not just linguistic skill, but a deep understanding of Egyptian culture, religion, and symbolism. Enter Jean-François Champollion, the French scholar often credited with cracking the code. Champollion's work was groundbreaking, but it didn't happen in isolation. He built on the efforts of other scholars like Thomas Young, who had already made significant strides in understanding the Demotic script. Even with the Rosetta Stone as a guide, Champollion spent years studying other inscriptions, comparing texts and testing hypotheses. His breakthrough came when he realized that hieroglyphs weren't just an alphabet or a series of symbols, but a complex system that combined phonetic and ideographic elements. This insight was crucial, but it relied on far more than just the Rosetta Stone. In fact, the stone was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Other artifacts, like the bilingual inscriptions on the Temple of Philae and the Abydos King list, provided additional clues. Scholars also drew on Coptic, the language of Christian Egypt, which preserved elements of ancient Egyptian phonetics. Even the work of medieval Arab historians who had studied hieroglyphs centuries earlier contributed to the growing body of knowledge. The process of decipherment was a collaborative, multi-generational effort, a testament to human curiosity and perseverance. So, why does the myth of the Rosetta Stone as the sole key to hieroglyphs persist? Perhaps because it's a simpler, more dramatic story. The idea of a single artifact unlocking an entire civilization's secrets is undeniably compelling. It fits neatly into the narrative of a eureka moment, a lone genius cracking the code. But this oversimplification does a disservice to the complexity of the process and to the countless scholars whose work made Champollion's breakthrough possible. This raises a broader question. Why do we often reduce complex achievements to single, iconic breakthroughs? Maybe it's because we crave clarity in a world full of nuance. Or perhaps it's easier to celebrate individual heroes than to grapple with the messy, collaborative nature of progress. But by doing so, we risk losing sight of the true story, one that's richer, more intricate, and far more human. As we reconsider the role of the Rosetta Stone, it's worth reflecting on another misunderstood artifact, the Antikythera mechanism. Often called the world's first computer, this ancient Greek device has sparked endless fascination and no shortage of myth. What if its story is less about technological marvels and more about the everyday ingenuity of the ancient world? The answers might surprise you and challenge how we see the roots of modern innovation. The image is iconic. Ancient Egyptians kneeling before statues of cat-headed deities, offering prayers and sacrifices to feline figures. For centuries, this idea has been repeated in books, films, and even cartoons, a society that worshipped cats as gods. It's a compelling story, one that paints a vivid picture of a culture obsessed with its furry companions. But here's the twist: while cats were indeed important in ancient Egypt, they weren't worshipped as gods. The truth about their role is far more nuanced and far more fascinating. Cats held a special place in Egyptian society, but their significance was rooted in practicality as much as spirituality. They were valued for their ability to protect grain stores from rodents, making them indispensable to a civilization dependent on agriculture. Over time, this practical relationship evolved into a symbolic one. Cats became associated with protection, fertility, and even royalty. The goddess Bastet, often depicted as a lioness or a woman with a cat's head, embodied these qualities. She was a protector of the home and a symbol of maternal care, but she wasn't the only animal-linked deity in the Egyptian pantheon. Egyptologists point out that animals played a complex role in Egyptian religion. Certain animals like cats, ibises, and falcons were seen as vessels for divine energy, but they weren't worshipped in the way we might imagine. Instead, they were considered living representations of the god's power. For example, a temple might house a sacred cat, but the cat itself wasn't the object of worship. It was a medium through which people could connect with the divine. This distinction is crucial as it highlights the Egyptians' sophisticated understanding of symbolism and ritual. So, how did the myth of cat worship take hold? Part of the answer lies in the way ancient Egyptian culture has been interpreted and romanticized over the centuries. Early European explorers, fascinated by Egypt's exoticism, often exaggerated or misunderstood its practices. The image of cat-worshipping Egyptians became a shorthand for the civilization's supposed strangeness and mysticism. Over time, this narrative was amplified by popular media, from Hollywood films to children's books, cementing the myth in the public imagination. This raises an intriguing question. Why do we so often exaggerate the role of animals in ancient religions? Perhaps it's because animals are relatable, bridging the gap between the human and the divine. Or maybe it's easier to focus on the tangible like a cat than to grapple with the abstract complexities of ancient belief systems. Whatever the reason, this myth has overshadowed the true richness of Egyptian culture, reducing its religious practices to a single, oversimplified image. The reality is that ancient Egyptian religion was a tapestry of interconnected beliefs, rituals, and symbols. Animals were just one thread in that tapestry, woven into a larger vision of the cosmos. By understanding this, we gain a deeper appreciation for how the Egyptians saw the world, not as a place divided between humans and gods, but as a harmonious whole where every creature had a role to play. As we reconsider this myth, it's worth turning our attention to another misunderstood aspect of Egyptian culture, their approach to medicine. Were the ancient Egyptians truly pioneers of modern medical practices, or is their reputation as healers more myth than reality? The answers might reshape how we see their contributions to the world of science. Rising over 200 feet into the sky, the Colossus of Rhodes is often imagined as a towering figure straddling the harbor entrance, its legs forming an arch for ships to pass beneath. This dramatic image, reproduced in countless illustrations, films, and even video games, has become synonymous with ancient engineering prowess. But here's the surprising truth: there's no evidence to suggest the Colossus actually stood astride the harbor. In fact, historians argue that this iconic depiction is a later invention, one that says more about our fascination with the grandiose than about the statue's true form. So, what did the Colossus look like? Historical accounts, like those of the ancient writer Pliny the Elder, describe it as a massive bronze statue of the sun god Helios, erected to commemorate Rhodes' victory over an invading army in 280 BC. It stood near the harbor, but not across it. Archaeologists and historians believe it was more likely positioned on a pedestal, overlooking the city and the sea. This placement would have made it visible to incoming ships, serving as a symbol of Rhodes' strength and divine favor. The myth of the Colossus straddling the harbor likely emerged during the Renaissance, when artists and scholars, inspired by classical texts but lacking detailed descriptions, began to imagine the statue in increasingly dramatic ways. The idea of a figure so large that ships could sail beneath its legs captured the imagination of the time. blending artistic license with a growing fascination for the monumental. Over the centuries, this interpretation became so ingrained in popular culture that it overshadowed the historical reality. Building the Colossus was no small feat, even without the harbor-straddling exaggeration. Constructed from bronze plates over an iron framework, the statue was a marvel of ancient engineering. Workers would have had to cast and shape each piece meticulously, then assemble them on site, a process that likely took 12 years to complete. The challenges of creating such a structure, from the logistics of materials to the physics of balance, highlight the ingenuity of the ancient Rhodians. Yet the statue's grandeur wasn't meant to defy nature. It was a testament to human skill and dedication, a tribute to both the gods and the city's resilience. This raises an intriguing question. Why do we so often prefer the grandiose over the historically accurate? Perhaps it's because myths like these offer a sense of wonder, a way to elevate the past into something larger than life. They remind us of the power of imagination, even as they obscure the true achievements of those who came before us. The Colossus of Rhodes, in its mythic form, has inspired countless modern monuments, from the Statue of Liberty to towering sculptures in cities around the world. Yet, by clinging to the exaggerated image, we risk overlooking the real story, one of innovation, artistry, and cultural pride. As we reconsider the legacy of the Colossus, it's worth turning our attention to another ancient statue shrouded in myth, the statue of Zeus at Olympia. Often regarded as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, this colossal figure has its own share of misconceptions. What if its story, like that of the Colossus, reveals more about how we remember the past than about the past itself? The answers might just reshape how we see the intersection of art, history, and myth. The idea that ancient Greeks believed in a flat earth is one of those myths that seems to stick around, no matter how many times it's debunked. It's a story that paints the Greeks, often celebrated as the fathers of Western philosophy and science, as surprisingly backward, clinging to a simplistic view of the world. But here's the truth. Many ancient Greek thinkers not only knew the earth was round, but even calculated its circumference with remarkable accuracy. So, how did this myth take root, and why does it persist? Let's start with the evidence. As early as the 6th century BCE, Greek philosophers like Pythagoras proposed that the earth was spherical. By the 4th century BCE, Aristotle had compiled a list of observations supporting this idea, from the curved shadow the earth casts on the moon during a lunar eclipse to the way ships disappear hull first over the horizon. Later, Eratosthenes, a scholar in the 3rd century BCE, famously calculated the Earth's circumference using the angles of shadows in 2 different cities. His estimate was off by only a few hundred miles, an astounding feat for the time. These weren't fringe ideas, they were widely accepted among educated Greeks. So, where did the flat Earth myth come from? The answer lies in the Middle Ages, centuries after the fall of ancient Greece. During this period, European scholars, influenced by religious and cultural shifts, began to reinterpret classical knowledge. Some medieval writers, like Lactantius and Cosmas Indicopoulos, rejected the spherical Earth model, arguing instead for a flat Earth based on biblical interpretations. Over time, this view became associated with the idea of a dark age of ignorance, a stark contrast to the supposed enlightenment of the modern era. The myth gained further traction in the 19th century, when writers like Washington Irving and Andrew Dixon White used it to criticize the medieval church. They framed the flat Earth as a symbol of medieval superstition, contrasting it with the scientific progress of their own time. This narrative, though historically inaccurate, served a rhetorical purpose. It reinforced the idea that humanity had emerged from darkness into light, with the ancient Greeks conveniently cast as the bridge between the two. But this raises a deeper question. why do we so often underestimate the intelligence of ancient peoples? Perhaps it's because we view history through the lens of progress, assuming that earlier societies must have been less advanced. Yet, the Greeks' understanding of the Earth's shape reminds us that ancient knowledge was far more sophisticated than we sometimes give it credit for. Their achievements in mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy laid the groundwork for much of modern science, challenging the notion that the past was a time of universal ignorance. This myth also reveals something about how we use history to define ourselves. By contrasting ancient ignorance with modern enlightenment, we create a narrative of progress that flatters our own time. But this oversimplification does a disservice to the complexity of history and to the brilliance of those who came before us. As we reconsider the flat Earth myth, it's worth turning our attention to another ancient belief that's often misunderstood: the idea of spontaneous generation. Did the Greeks truly believe life could emerge from inanimate matter, or is there more to the story? The answers might just challenge how we see the roots of modern biology. When we think of writing systems, images of alphabets, hieroglyphs, or cuneiform often come to mind: symbols etched into stone, clay, or parchment. But what if writing didn't always look the way we expect it to? This brings us to a persistent myth about the Inca Empire, the idea that they had no written language. For centuries, it's been widely believed that the Inca relied solely on quipus knotted cords made of cotton or wool for record keeping. While quipus were indeed a cornerstone of Inca administration, the assumption that they lacked a formal writing system is a simplification that overlooks the complexity and sophistication of their communication methods. Quipus were far more than simple accounting tools. These intricate arrangements of knots and cords served as a sophisticated system for recording information, from census data and tax records to historical narratives and even poetic verses. Each knot's position, color, and type carried specific meanings, creating a form of communication that was both precise and versatile. Modern researchers like anthropologist Sabine Hyland have suggested that quipus may have functioned as a form of three-dimensional writing, capable of encoding complex ideas and stories. In fact, some historians argue that quipus could have been used to convey entire narratives, much like a written text. So why do we so often dismiss quipus as a primitive or inferior system? Part of the answer lies in our own biases. Western cultures have traditionally valued alphabetic writing as the pinnacle of communication, often relegating other systems, like quipus or even Chinese characters, to a secondary status. This Eurocentric view has shaped how we interpret ancient civilizations, leading us to undervalue their innovations. But the truth is, the Inca didn't need an alphabet to create a thriving, highly organized empire. Their system of quipus was perfectly suited to their needs, allowing them to manage vast territories, coordinate complex labor systems, and preserve their cultural heritage. The myth of the Inca having no written language also ignores the possibility that they may have used other forms of writing that haven't survived. Spanish chroniclers who arrived in the 16th century documented the existence of painted boards and textiles that may have served as additional communication tools. While these artifacts haven't been found, their descriptions suggest that the Incas' methods of recording information were more varied than we once thought. This raises a broader question: why do we assume that writing must look a certain way? The Incas' use of quipus challenges us to expand our definition of writing, to see it not just as marks on a page, but as any system that encodes and transmits information. By doing so, we gain a deeper appreciation for the ingenuity of cultures that developed unique solutions to the challenges of communication. The myth of the Incas' missing writing system has shaped how we view their civilization, often portraying them as less advanced than their contemporaries. But by understanding the true complexity of quipus and the potential for other forms of writing, we can see the Inca Empire in a new light. as a society that mastered the art of communication in ways we're still learning to decode. As we reconsider this myth, it's worth exploring another aspect of Inca culture that's often misunderstood: their engineering marvels. How did a civilization without the wheel or iron tools construct some of the most precise stonework in history? The answers might just challenge everything we thought we knew about ancient innovation. The image of ancient Rome is often painted in shades of excess and decay: lavish banquets, gladiatorial spectacles, and emperors lost in a haze of indulgence. This vision of a society in moral freefall has become a cultural shorthand for the dangers of decadence, a cautionary tale of what happens when power and luxury spiral out of control. But here's the thing: the reality of ancient Rome was far more complex than this myth suggests. While there were certainly moments of excess, the Roman Empire was also a place of remarkable innovation, governance, and resilience. So, how did the myth of Roman decadence take hold, and why does it persist as a symbol of imperial downfall? Historians point out that the idea of Roman moral decline largely comes from the writings of Roman authors themselves. Figures like Tacitus and Juvenal lamented what they saw as the erosion of traditional values, painting vivid portraits of corruption and extravagance. These accounts, while compelling, were often exaggerated for rhetorical effect, a way to critique contemporary society and call for a return to so-called old Roman virtues. Over time, these critiques were taken at face value, becoming the foundation for the modern myth of Roman decadence. But the Roman Empire wasn't just a story of decline. For centuries, it was a powerhouse of administration, engineering, and cultural exchange. The Romans built an extensive network of roads, aqueducts, and cities that connected their vast empire. They developed legal systems and governance structures that influenced Western civilization for millennia. Even during periods of political turmoil, Roman society demonstrated a remarkable capacity for adaptation and survival. This isn't to say the empire was without flaws. Corruption, inequality, and exploitation were real and pervasive. But to reduce Rome's legacy to mere decadence is to overlook its profound achievements and enduring influence. The myth of Roman decline has also been shaped by later interpretations. During the Renaissance and Enlightenment, European thinkers often invoked Rome as a cautionary tale, using its supposed fall to critique their own societies. In the modern era, this narrative has been amplified by popular culture, from films like Gladiator to political rhetoric warning of modern-day Rome. These portrayals reflect a broader tendency to project our fears and anxieties onto the past, using ancient empires as mirrors for our own concerns about power, morality, and sustainability. This raises an important question: why do we so often frame history as a story of rise and fall? Perhaps it's because these narratives offer a sense of order, a way to make sense of the complexities of human experience. But by doing so, we risk oversimplifying the past, turning nuanced realities into moral lessons that may not hold up under scrutiny. The story of Rome isn't just about decadence and decline. It's about ambition, innovation, and the challenges of sustaining a vast and diverse society. As we reconsider this myth, it's worth turning our attention to another aspect of Roman culture that's often misunderstood: their military might. Was the Roman army truly an unstoppable force, or does its reputation overshadow the realities of warfare in the ancient world? The answers might just challenge how we see one of history's most formidable powers. The vibrant bursts of color lighting up the night sky, the crackling sounds of celebration fireworks have become synonymous with joy and festivity. And for centuries, we've been told that this dazzling display was the very reason ancient Chinese alchemists invented gunpowder. It's a charming story, one that paints the Chinese as a people who turned science into art. But here's the twist: gunpowder wasn't created for entertainment. Its origins lie not in celebration but in conflict. Historical records and archaeological evidence reveal that gunpowder was first developed during the Tang dynasty around the 9th century CE as part of a broader quest for immortality. Alchemists experimenting with sulfur, saltpeter, and charcoal stumbled upon a volatile mixture that could produce explosions. Far from being intended for fireworks, this discovery was initially harnessed for military purposes. By the 10th century, gunpowder was being used in flamethrowers, explosive bombs, and even early forms of rocket artillery. The Chinese military quickly recognized its potential, incorporating it into their arsenal to devastating effect. So, how did gunpowder shift from the battlefield to the festival grounds? Over time, the Chinese began to explore its more peaceful applications. By the 12th century, gunpowder was being used to create firecrackers and rudimentary fireworks for ceremonial occasions. These displays, often tied to religious and cultural celebrations, became a way to ward off evil spirits and bring good fortune. The use of gunpowder in this context was a creative adaptation of a technology originally designed for war. This raises an intriguing question. Why do we so often romanticize inventions, stripping away their practical origins in favor of more whimsical narratives? Perhaps it's because stories of celebration feel more uplifting than tales of warfare. Fireworks, with their beauty and spectacle, capture our imagination in a way that military applications never could. But by focusing solely on this aspect, we risk overlooking the true ingenuity of the ancient Chinese. Their ability to transform a dangerous substance into both a tool of war and a symbol of joy speaks to their adaptability and creativity. The myth of gunpowder as a purely celebratory invention also reflects a broader tendency to simplify the history of innovation. We often frame technological breakthroughs as singular, purpose-driven achievements, ignoring the messy, often accidental paths that lead to discovery. Gunpowder's story is a reminder that innovation is rarely linear. It's shaped by trial and error, necessity, and sometimes even unintended consequences. This myth has had a lasting impact on how we perceive Chinese innovation. It's contributed to the idea of China as a land of artistic and scientific marvels, a place where even warfare could be transformed into beauty. But it also oversimplifies a complex history, reducing centuries of technological development to a single, colorful image. By understanding the true origins of gunpowder, we gain a deeper appreciation for the ingenuity and resourcefulness of ancient Chinese society. As we reconsider this myth, it's worth turning our attention to another misunderstood ancient invention, the compass. Often credited as a tool for navigation, its story is far more intricate and far more revealing about how ancient cultures interacted with the natural world. What if its true purpose challenges everything we thought we knew about exploration and discovery? The answers might just change how we see the roots of modern technology. The Great Sphinx of Giza, with its lion's body and human head, stands as one of the most iconic symbols of ancient Egypt. For centuries, it's been widely believed that this monumental statue was built during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BC as a tribute to his power and divinity. The image of the Sphinx as a royal monument has been etched into our collective imagination, reinforced by textbooks, documentaries, and even blockbuster films. But what if this narrative is only part of the story, or perhaps not the story at all? Emerging evidence suggests that the Sphinx may be far older than we've been led to believe, challenging our understanding of its origins and purpose. Archaeologists and geologists have long debated the age of the Sphinx, with some proposing that it predates Khafre's reign by thousands of years. One of the most compelling arguments comes from the study of erosion patterns on the statue's body. Unlike the pyramids, which show minimal weathering, the Sphinx bears deep vertical grooves that some experts believe were caused by prolonged exposure to rainwater. The catch: the last time the Giza Plateau experienced significant rainfall was around 10,000 years ago, during a period known as the Neolithic subpluvial. This has led some researchers, like geologist Robert Schoch, to suggest that the Sphinx could be much older than traditional Egyptology acknowledges. The architectural evidence also raises questions. While the Sphinx is traditionally linked to Khufu's pyramid complex, there are discrepancies in the construction techniques and materials used. The limestone blocks used for the Sphinx's temple, for example, are far more weathered than those of Khufu's pyramid, hinting at a possible time gap between the two structures. Additionally, the Sphinx's face, though heavily eroded, doesn't perfectly match the known depictions of Khufu, leading some to speculate that it may have been recarved at a later date. So, how did the myth of the Sphinx as a royal monument take hold? Much of it can be traced back to the early days of Egyptology, when scholars like Auguste Mariette and Gaston Maspero linked the Sphinx to Khufu based on inscriptions and nearby artifacts. Over time, this interpretation became the accepted narrative, reinforced by the lack of alternative explanations. The idea of the Sphinx as a symbol of pharaonic power also fits neatly into the broader story of ancient Egypt as a civilization defined by its rulers. Yet, this narrative overlooks the possibility that the Sphinx could have been a relic of an even older, perhaps forgotten, culture. This myth has been perpetuated not just by scholars but by popular culture. Films like The Mummy and media portrayals often depict the Sphinx as a royal guardian, its enigmatic smile forever tied to the pharaohs. Even modern textbooks frequently present the Sphinx as a product of the Old Kingdom, rarely mentioning the debates over its age. This raises a thought-provoking question. Why do we resist revising our understanding of ancient monuments, even when new evidence challenges long-held beliefs? Is it because these myths provide a sense of continuity, a way to connect the dots of history, or is it simply easier to accept the familiar rather than grapple with the unknown? The story of the Sphinx reminds us that history is not static. It's a living, evolving field that requires us to question and re-examine our assumptions. As we peel back the layers of this ancient enigma, we're forced to confront the limits of our knowledge and the mysteries that still lie buried beneath the sands of time. This brings us to another misunderstood monument, one that has sparked just as much debate and fascination: the megaliths of Stonehenge. Were these massive stones truly aligned with the stars, or is their story more complex than we've been led to believe? The answers might just change how we see the intersection of ancient science and spirituality. The image is striking: ancient Greek athletes, their bodies glistening under the Mediterranean sun, competing in the nude as crowds cheer from the stands. It's a scene that's been immortalized in art, literature, and even modern depictions of the Olympics, reinforcing the idea that nudity was a universal practice in ancient Greek sports. But here's the twist: while nudity did play a role in Greek athletics, it wasn't as widespread or consistent as we often imagine. The truth about this practice is far more nuanced and far more revealing about the cultural complexities of ancient Greece. Historians point out that the tradition of competing nude likely began in the 8th century BCE, possibly in Sparta, where physical fitness was deeply tied to military preparedness. Over time, the practice spread to other city-states, becoming particularly associated with the Olympic Games. However, even within Greece, attitudes toward nudity varied widely. In some regions, athletes wore loincloths or other garments, especially in earlier periods. For example, vase paintings from the 6th century BC show competitors wearing belts or short skirts, suggesting that nudity wasn't always the norm. The cultural significance of nudity in Greek society also adds layers to this myth. For the Greeks, the naked body wasn't just a symbol of physical prowess. It was a celebration of human form and a reflection of their ideals of beauty and virtue. Competing nude was seen as a way to honor the gods, particularly Zeus, who was believed to watch over the games. It also emphasized equality among athletes, stripping away distinctions of wealth or status. Yet, this practice was deeply rooted in a specific cultural context, one that valued male athleticism and often excluded women, who were barred from participating or even watching the games in many cases. So, how did the myth of universal nudity take hold? Part of the answer lies in the way ancient Greece has been romanticized over the centuries. Renaissance artists and Enlightenment thinkers, inspired by classical ideals, often depicted Greek athletes as paragons of physical perfection, reinforcing the image of nudity as a defining feature of their culture. Modern media, from films to sports iconography, has perpetuated this idea, turning it into a shorthand for the purity and nobility of ancient competition. This raises an intriguing question. Why do we so often idealize ancient practices without considering their context? Perhaps it's because we're drawn to stories that simplify the past, presenting it as a time of uncomplicated ideals. But by doing so, we risk overlooking the diversity and complexity of ancient societies. The Greeks themselves had varied customs and traditions, shaped by the distinct values of their city-states. What was true in Sparta wasn't necessarily true in Athens or Corinth. The myth of nude athletics also has a lasting impact on how we view modern sports. Today, the idea of competing nude seems unthinkable, yet the legacy of Greek ideals, strength, discipline, and the pursuit of excellence still shapes our understanding of athleticism. This myth reminds us that the past is never as straightforward as it seems, and that our interpretations of history are often shaped by the values and biases of our own time. As we reconsider this myth, it's worth exploring another misunderstood aspect of ancient sports, the role of competition itself. Were the ancient games truly about fair play and honor, or do their stories reveal a darker side of rivalry and ambition? The answers might challenge how we see the roots of modern sportsmanship. When we think about the origins of writing, the image that often comes to mind is one of ancient scribes hunched over clay tablets, meticulously recording taxes, grain stores, and trade transactions. This idea that writing was invented purely for administrative purposes has become a cornerstone of how we understand the rise of civilization. After all, it makes sense, doesn't it? Writing as a tool for bureaucracy, a way to keep track of resources and power. But what if this narrative only tells part of the story? What if the true origins of writing were far more artistic, spiritual, and deeply human than we've been led to believe? The earliest known form of writing, cuneiform, emerged in ancient Mesopotamia around 3200 BCE. For decades, historians assumed it was developed to meet the practical needs of a growing society, keeping records of goods, contracts, and legal codes. And while it's true that cuneiform was eventually used for these purposes, recent discoveries have revealed a more nuanced picture. Some of the oldest cuneiform tablets don't contain lists of grain or livestock. Instead, they feature poetic hymns, prayers, and even artistic symbols. These early texts suggest that writing may have begun as a way to express religious devotion and capture the intangible ideas, emotions, and connections to the divine. Take, for example, the famous Uruk tablets, some of the earliest examples of cuneiform. While many of these tablets do record economic transactions, others contain intricate symbols and what appear to be early attempts at storytelling. Historians like Denise Schmant-Besserat have argued that these symbols evolved from earlier systems of tokens used in religious rituals, suggesting that writing's roots may lie in the spiritual rather than the practical. This challenges the myth that writing was born out of necessity, instead pointing to a more complex interplay between art, religion, and administration. So, why has the myth of writing as a purely administrative tool persisted? part of the answer lies in how we view progress. We often frame technological advancements as driven by practical needs, as if creativity and spirituality are secondary to survival. But the evidence from Mesopotamia tells a different story, one where writing was as much about exploring the human experience as it was about managing resources. This raises a thought-provoking question. Why do we so often reduce complex innovations to their most utilitarian purposes? Is it because we struggle to imagine a world where art and spirituality were as vital to survival as food and shelter? The diverse uses of cuneiform further complicate the myth. Beyond its role in record-keeping, cuneiform was used for everything from epic poetry like the Epic of Gilgamesh to personal letters and school exercises. It was a tool for kings to proclaim their victories, for priests to communicate with the gods, and for ordinary people to express their thoughts and feelings. This versatility highlights the richness of Mesopotamian culture and reminds us that writing was never just one thing. It was a multifaceted invention that evolved to meet the needs of a complex society. This myth has also shaped how we perceive ancient civilizations, often casting them as pragmatic and transactional rather than creative and introspective. By oversimplifying the origins of writing, we risk missing the full picture of what these societies were capable of. The Mesopotamians weren't just bureaucrats, they were poets, dreamers, and seekers of meaning. Their legacy isn't just in the records they left behind, but in the stories they told and the gods they honored. As we reconsider this myth, it's worth turning our attention to another misunderstood ancient invention, the compass. Often credited solely as a navigational tool, its story is far more intricate and far more revealing about how ancient cultures understood the world. What if its true purpose challenges everything we thought we knew about exploration and discovery? The answers might just change how we see the roots of modern technology. The image of the ancient Celts is one that's been burned into our collective imagination. Wild, blue-painted warriors charging into battle, their hair spiked, their weapons raised, their cries echoing across the battlefield. It's a dramatic scene, one that's been immortalized in films, books, and even video games. But here's the thing, this portrayal of the Celts as barbaric, uncivilized fighters is a myth, one that overshadows the true complexity and sophistication of their culture. Historical evidence paints a very different picture. Far from being mere warriors, the Celts were a deeply artistic and politically organized people. They built intricate hill forts, established trade networks that stretched across Europe, and created stunning metalwork and jewelry that still astonishes archaeologists today. Their society was structured around tribal kingdoms, each with its own leaders, laws, and customs. The Celts weren't just fighters, they were farmers, artisans, and diplomats with a rich oral tradition and a deep connection to the natural world. So, where did the myth of the barbaric Celt come from? Much of it can be traced back to the Romans, who viewed the Celts as a threat to their expanding empire. Roman writers like Julius Caesar and Tacitus often portrayed the Celts as savage and primitive, emphasizing their fierceness in battle to justify Rome's military campaigns against them. These accounts, written by the victors, became the foundation for how the Celts were remembered in Western history. Over time, this narrative was reinforced by later European cultures, who used the image of the barbaric Celt to define their own sense of civilization and progress. But the Celts were far from isolated or uncivilized. They engaged in extensive cultural exchanges with their neighbors, from the Greeks and Etruscans to the Germanic tribes. Archaeological finds, like the Greek-inspired wine vessels found in Celtic burial sites, reveal a people who were deeply connected to the wider world. Their art, with its intricate spirals and animal motifs, influenced styles across Europe, while their religious practices, centered around Druids and natural deities, reflected a sophisticated understanding of the cosmos. This raises an important question. Why do we so often label ancient peoples as barbaric without understanding their culture? Perhaps it's because it's easier to define ourselves against a supposed other, to draw a line between civilized and uncivilized. But by doing so, we miss the chance to see the Celts for who they truly were, a dynamic, multifaceted society with a legacy that extends far beyond the battlefield. The myth of the barbaric Celt has been perpetuated not just by history but by popular culture. From Shakespeare's Macbeth to modern fantasy novels, the Celts are often depicted as wild, untamed figures, their humanity reduced to a single dimension. Even today, this image persists, shaping how we view their contributions to art, politics, and spirituality. As we reconsider this myth, it's worth exploring another ancient society that's been similarly misunderstood, the Vikings. Were they truly the ruthless raiders of legend, or does their story reveal a more complex and interconnected world? The answers might just challenge how we see the legacy of one of history's most infamous peoples. The Persian Empire, a name that often conjures images of ruthless conquerors, iron-fisted rulers, and a sprawling dominion held together by fear and oppression. It's a narrative that's been repeated in textbooks, films, and even political rhetoric, painting the Persians as the archetype of despotic power. But what if this image is more myth than reality? What if the Persian Empire was, in fact, a model of tolerance, innovation, and administrative brilliance? Let's start with the man often credited as the empire's founding visionary, Cyrus the Great. When Cyrus conquered Babylon in 539 BCE, he didn't impose his culture or religion on the defeated people. Instead, he issued a decree allowing the Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, a move so unprecedented that it earned him a place in the Hebrew Bible as a liberator. This policy of religious and cultural tolerance wasn't an isolated act, it was a cornerstone of Persian rule. Under Cyrus and his successors, the empire became a mosaic of diverse peoples, languages, and faiths, all governed with a surprising degree of fairness and respect. Darius I, another towering figure in Persian history, took this legacy even further. He established a sophisticated administrative system that allowed the empire to function as a cohesive unit while respecting local customs. The satrapies, provincial divisions governed by local officials, were granted considerable autonomy as long as they remained loyal to the central authority. This decentralized approach wasn't just practical, it was revolutionary for its time. Roads like the Royal Road, stretching over 1,600 miles, connected the empire, facilitating trade, communication, and cultural exchange. The Persians even introduced a standardized currency, the darik, which streamlined commerce across their vast territories. So, how did the myth of Persian tyranny take hold? Much of it can be traced back to ancient Greek sources, particularly the writings of Herodotus. As Persia's primary rival, the Greeks had a vested interest in portraying the empire as a threat to freedom and democracy. Their accounts, while rich in detail, were often tinged with bias, emphasizing Persian excess and cruelty while downplaying their achievements. Over time, these narratives were amplified by Western historians, who used the image of Persian despotism to contrast with the supposed virtues of Greek and Roman civilization. This framing reinforced the idea of the East as a place of barbarism and oppression, a stereotype that has lingered for centuries. This myth has had a profound impact on how we view Middle Eastern history. By casting the Persians as tyrannical conquerors, we've overlooked their contributions to governance, culture, and human rights. The Cyrus Cylinder, often called the first charter of human rights, is a testament to their progressive policies. It's a reminder that the Persian Empire was far more than a military powerhouse. It was a society that valued diversity, innovation, and the well-being of its people. This raises a thought-provoking question. Why do we so readily accept historical narratives that paint empires as monolithic villains? Is it because these stories fit neatly into our understanding of power and morality, or because they reflect our own biases and fears? By revisiting the Persian Empire, we're forced to confront the complexities of history and the ways in which it's often shaped by those who write it. As we reconsider this myth, it's worth turning our attention to another misunderstood empire, the Byzantines. Were they truly the stagnant, bureaucratic relic of Rome, or does their story reveal a vibrant and resilient civilization that bridged the ancient and medieval world? The answers might just challenge how we see the legacy of one of history's most enduring empires. The Indus Valley civilization, flourishing around 2600 BCE, is often described as a society without a central government, a collection of independent cities loosely connected by trade and culture, but lacking any unified political structure. It's an image that paints the Indus Valley as a kind of ancient anarchy, a place where order emerged organically without rulers or bureaucracies. But what if this portrayal is more myth than reality? What if the Indus Valley was far more organized and centralized than we've been led to believe? Archaeological discoveries over the past century have revealed a civilization that was anything but chaotic. Cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa showcase a level of urban planning that rivals even the most advanced ancient societies. Streets laid out in precise grids, standardized brick sizes, and sophisticated drainage systems all point to a high degree of central coordination. How could such uniformity exist without some form of governing authority? The answer, historians argue, lies in the evidence itself, evidence that challenges the myth of decentralization. Take, for example, the standardized weights and measures found across Indus Valley sites. These weren't just random artifacts, they were part of a system that ensured consistency in trade and commerce. From the smallest beads to the largest storage jars, everything adhered to a precise scale. This kind of standardization doesn't happen by accident. It suggests a central authority, or at least a shared set of rules that governed economic activity. Similarly, the uniformity of city layouts with their carefully planned streets and public buildings implies a level of oversight that goes beyond mere local decision-making. Historians like Gregory Possehl and Jane McIntosh have proposed that the Indus Valley may have been governed by a network of elites or councils, rather than a single ruler. This model, sometimes called a corporate state, would have allowed for collective decision-making while maintaining the centralization needed to manage such a vast and complex society. The absence of grand palaces or temples, often seen as symbols of centralized power in other civilizations, doesn't mean the Indus Valley lacked governance. Instead, it suggests that their political structures may have been more subtle, more focused on utility than on spectacle. This raises an important question. Why do we so often assume that ancient societies were simpler than our own? Perhaps it's because we expect power to look a certain way: palaces, thrones, and towering monuments, but the Indus Valley challenges this assumption. Their achievements in urban planning, trade, and technology speak to a society that was highly organized, even if its structures of governance were less visible. By clinging to the myth of decentralization, we risk underestimating their ingenuity and the sophistication of their political systems. The myth of a government less Indus Valley has also shaped how we perceive early civilizations. It's often used as a contrast to the more centralized societies of Mesopotamia and Egypt, reinforcing a narrative of progress that moves from simple to complex. But this binary view oversimplifies the diversity of human history. The Indus Valley wasn't a stepping stone on the path to civilization. It was a unique and thriving society in its own right, one that found its own way to balance order and autonomy. As we reflect on this myth, it's worth asking, What other assumptions do we make about the past? How often do we project our own ideas of power and organization onto ancient cultures, missing the ways they might have done things differently? By debunking these myths, we don't just correct the record, we open ourselves to a richer, more nuanced understanding of human history. And with that, we come to the end of our journey through 24 myths of age-old civilizations. Each one, from the pyramids of Egypt to the cities of the Indus Valley, reminds us that the past is full of surprises, and that the stories we tell about it are as much about us as they are about those who came before. As we reach the end of our journey through 24 myths of ancient civilizations, it's worth pausing to reflect on what we've uncovered. From the Great Pyramids builders to the supposed barbarism of the Celts, each myth we've examined reveals a common thread. The stories we tell about the past are rarely as simple as they seem. These narratives, often shaped by biases, misunderstandings, or even deliberate storytelling, have profound implications for how we understand history and ourselves. The myths we've explored are more than just historical curiosities. They've shaped our textbooks, our films, and even our collective imagination. They've painted ancient peoples as either impossibly advanced or hopelessly primitive, overlooking the complexity and humanity of their lives. By questioning these myths, we've not only corrected the historical record, but also gained a richer, more nuanced understanding of the past. We've seen how the Maya's calendar wasn't a doomsday device but a testament to their astronomical genius, how the Persians weren't tyrants but pioneers of tolerance, and how the Inca's quippers were far more than simple knots. They were a sophisticated form of communication. But why does this matter? Why should we care about the myths of civilizations long gone? The answer lies in the power of history to shape our present. As the writer William Faulkner once said, "The past is never dead. It's not even past. The stories we tell about ancient peoples influence how we see ourselves and our place in the world. They shape our values, our politics, and even our sense of identity. By clinging to myths, we risk perpetuating stereotypes, oversimplifying complex realities, and missing the lessons the past has to offer." This journey has been a reminder that history is not a fixed story but an ongoing conversation. It's a field where new discoveries can overturn centuries of assumptions, where a single artifact or inscription can rewrite what we thought we knew. It's also a call to action, a challenge to approach history with curiosity, humility, and a willingness to question what we've been told. Whether it's the myths of ancient civilizations or the narratives of our own time, critical thinking is our most powerful tool for uncovering the truth. So, what's next? How can you take these insights and apply them to your own life? Start by questioning the stories you've always accepted as true. Whether it's a historical myth, a cultural stereotype, or even a personal belief, ask yourself, where does this idea come from? What evidence supports it? And what might I be missing? By cultivating this mindset, you'll not only gain a deeper understanding of the world, but also become a more thoughtful, informed participant in the ongoing story of humanity. Before we wrap up, I want to thank you for joining me on this exploration of ancient myths. If you enjoyed this video and found it thought-provoking, consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into history, science, and the mysteries of the past. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. What myth surprised you the most? What questions do you still have about ancient civilizations? Let's keep the conversation going. History is more than a collection of dates and facts. It's a living, breathing story that connects us to the people who came before. By questioning the myths of the past, we honor their legacy and ensure that their voices, in all their complexity, continue to be heard. As we close this chapter, remember, the past is never truly behind us. It's a part of who we are, shaping the present and guiding the future. And that's a story worth telling and retelling with care, curiosity, and an open mind.